The storage room smelled of industrial bleach and old cardboard, and Sabine Wray had a metal shelf bracket in her hand like it was going to do anything against the men in the hallway. She pressed her back against the cold shelving unit, heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Across the small room, Leith Carano stood completely still, one hand resting at his side, the other holding a firearm she hadn't known he was carrying. His face was arranged in the particular stillness of a man for whom violence was simply a form of problem-solving. "There are 4 of them," she whispered, "at least. Your angle is compromised on the right side, and I can hear them splitting up and—" "Miss Wray, you need to let me stand near the door. If I can create a distraction—" "Miss Wray," his voice was lower now, quieter, which somehow made it more absolute. "Step back." She didn't. "You can't cover your right peripheral without—" His hand closed around her wrist, warm, calloused, unhurried, and pulled her firmly behind him. His single remaining eye, a dark storm-colored hazel, found her in the emergency lighting with complete precision. The eye patch caught the low glow. The old scarring along his right cheekbone did too. "I may only see the world with one eye," he said quietly, "but I have never missed a thing." Outside, the boots stopped, waited. A shadow passed beneath the door. And then Leith Carano moved, and Sabine understood for the first time that she had been fundamentally wrong about what she was dealing with. 6 months before that night, she had never heard his name. She'd been second-chair violin at the Adrian Arshad Center and running pro bono music therapy sessions at the Ryder Trauma Center on Thursday afternoons, and her largest professional problem had been a recurring blister on her ring finger, and a brother who borrowed money the way other people borrowed pens, casually, repeatedly, and with every intention of returning it someday that never arrived. Denny Ray had always been the dreamer. Sabine had always been the practical one. She played scales for 5 hours a day. She read lease agreements before signing them. She kept a spreadsheet of her expenses going back 4 years, and had never once, in 27 years of conscious life, allowed herself the luxury of a decision she hadn't thought through. None of that had saved her when the men showed up at her apartment. 3 of them, black SUV with no plates. Polite in the specific way that very dangerous people are polite, every courtesy intact, every implication crystal clear. Denny had borrowed $2 million from the Carano syndicate to fund a medical device startup. The startup had collapsed. Denny had boarded a flight to Lisbon 11 days before the debt came due, leaving behind a studio apartment full of motivational posters and a sister with no idea any of it had happened. The Carano syndicate, apparently, did not consider sibling ignorance a valid form of exemption. She arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning. The peninsula it sat on south of Miami felt like a geographic argument. The kind of place that existed specifically to remind you how far you were from everything familiar. Oscar met her at the door. He was broad-shouldered and expressionless in the way of men who had witnessed enough that surprise no longer registered as a useful response. He told her, in exactly 4 words, that Mr. Carano was waiting. She brought her violin. She had been specifically told to. The study occupied the entire top floor, glass walls on 3 sides facing the water. Leith Carano was standing at the window when she entered, one hand braced against the frame, looking out at the Atlantic with his back to her. She registered the eye patch immediately, black, minimal, covering the right side, and beneath it, the faint topography of scarring that mapped a diagonal line down his cheekbone. The rest of him was quietly formidable, tall, dark-haired, the kind of physically substantial that didn't announce itself so much as simply occupy space. He turned when she crossed the threshold, and the remaining eye took her in with the efficiency of a man who made fast decisions for a living. "Miss Wray, sit." She sat. He didn't. He moved to the edge of the mahogany desk, crossed his arms, and looked at her the way a surgeon looks at imaging results. "Your brother owes me $2 million and does not appear to intend to pay it. You are here because I am willing to settle the debt through an alternative arrangement, and because you were specifically recommended." Recommended by who? By your work. He nodded at the case in her hands. The Arshit Center, the Rider Sessions. You specialize in patients with chronic pain and neurological conditions. You've documented results with tinnitus specifically. He paused. I looked into it. Sabine's fingers tightened around the case handle. I'm a violinist, Mr. Carano. I don't cure anything. No, but you manage it. He turned slightly, not to hide the scarring, she understood, but simply because it was a habit of orientation, adjusting his good eye toward what mattered. The acid attack that did this also left me with significant tinnitus in the left ear. Constant, high frequency. It interrupts concentration, sleep, operational judgment. Every clinical option has failed. The only consistent relief I've found is live string music. Solo instrument, same room. He met her gaze. You will serve as my personal music therapist. 1 hour in the morning, 1 in the evening. When public appearances require it, you will accompany me. Your brother's debt is cleared. You're housed here, expenses covered. The arrangement runs 1 year. Sabine was quiet for a moment. And if I refuse? Then I find Denny in Lisbon, Leith said, as though the sentence had no particular weight to it, and the conversation becomes significantly less pleasant for everyone involved. She stayed. The first week was an education in someone else's silence. Leith Carano did not make conversation. He did not explain himself. He occupied rooms with a contained authority that changed the atmosphere of them. Like the difference in pressure before a weather system, and Sabine, who had spent a decade developing a musician's sensitivity to the emotional texture of a room, felt every variation of it. She played Bach in the study at 7 every morning. Structured, predictable. She watched from the corner of her eye as something eased in the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. He worked while she played, reviewing documents, speaking in low murmurs on the phone, but she could tell he was listening. The tinnitus responded to specific overtone frequencies in a violin's upper register. She had spent 12 years learning to control those frequencies. She used them now and didn't let herself think too hard about for whom. On the 4th morning he said, without looking up from his desk, "You changed the tempo in the second movement." "The acoustics shift when the humidity rises," she said. "I compensated." He looked up. The hazel eye was sharp, genuinely interested in a way that caught her off guard. "You hear that in real time?" "I hear everything in real time," she said, and it came out more honest than she'd planned. A pause. Something shifted in his expression, brief and internal. "Yes," he said, "I imagine you do." She began to understand what he meant by that in the weeks that followed. A musician's ear trained to Sabine's degree of precision did not clock off when the violin went back in its case. She heard hesitation in voices a half-beat before the speaker finished their sentence. She heard the way certain words landed wrong, too rehearsed, slightly off-rhythm, like a note played technically in tune, but phased incorrectly against the surrounding harmony. She had always had this ability. She had spent her whole life cataloguing it without knowing what to call it. She hadn't known until she came to live in Leith Carano's world what it would actually be worth. Fulton Hess was the first thing that sounded wrong. Leith's chief of staff was a lean, angular man in his late 40s, with the particular smoothness of someone who had been charming professionally. For so long it had become structural. He moved through the estate with an easy familiarity that read, to Sabine's attuned ear, less like belonging and more like claiming, like a man already mentally measuring the rooms for new furniture. When he came to the study one Wednesday afternoon to brief Leith on a shipment complication, Sabine was in the corner tuning for the evening session, quiet and apparently irrelevant. "Timing issue at Port Everglades," Fulton said, setting a folder on the desk. "The crew chief wants authorization to reroute through the Bahamas, adds 4 days. Leith didn't open the folder. "Tell him no, use the Hialeah warehouse. I refreshed the contact list last month." "Of course." Fulton's smile stayed exactly where it was. "I'll relay that." The word relay landed wrong. A fraction of a pause before it, a slight downward shift in pitch beneath the professional tone, the vocal equivalent of a wrong note tucked inside a familiar chord. Sabine's bow hand went still for just a moment. She filed it away. She wasn't sure yet what she had heard, but she kept it. 3 weeks in, Leith came to her door at 10 in the evening and asked her to play something she chose herself. Not the therapy protocol, something she'd pick. She played Piazzolla. The music moved through the glass-walled room like something with a pulse, and she didn't watch him. But she felt the change in the room the way she always felt changes. Barometric, immediate. When she finished, the silence that followed was the kind that meant something had been released, rather than simply ending. "Where did you learn that?" he said. Not quite a question. "My mother. She was from Buenos Aires. She played tangos on Sunday mornings like it was a religious obligation." A pause. "She died when I was 14. A different quality of silence. "My father was killed when I was 19, Leith said. "I inherited what was left of what he'd built and spent the next 2 decades making it into something he wouldn't recognize. Whether that's a success story or not, I still don't know." Sabine looked at him then, directly, without the clinical distance she had been maintaining. In the dark of the room, the city lights fractured on the water behind him, and he looked like something carved out of difficult material. The eye patch, the scarring, the set of him. None of it looked like damage to her anymore. It looked like biography. "Survival stories are different from success stories," she said. "They're harder, usually, and more true." He was quiet for a long moment. He didn't leave for another hour, and she played for all of it, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the most honest conversation she'd had in years. The charity auction at the Brickell Harbour Hotel was held on a Saturday in late October. A vast white room full of South Florida money and precisely maintained social surfaces. Sabine wore deep burgundy silk. Leith fastened a diamond bracelet around her wrist in the car, his calloused thumb pressing briefly against the pulse point at her wrist as he worked the clasp, and she told herself the warmth that moved up her arm afterward was just the metal adjusting to her skin temperature. Octave Burr was holding court near the bar when they arrived, silver-haired, heavy-set, the polished manners of a man who had been genuinely dangerous for so long he no longer needed to make the effort of appearing otherwise. He crossed the room when he saw Leith, hand extended, smile cold and wide. "Carano, good of you to come out." His gaze moved to the eye patch with the deliberate casualness of someone making sure you noticed. Brave, truly. Leith shook his hand with a grip that made Burr's expression flicker. "Octave, I heard your offshore portfolio had a difficult quarter. My sympathies." Burr's attention shifted to Sabine, the specific shift of a man looking for a softer target. His gaze moved over her with a laziness that read as dismissal first and appraisal second. "The therapist. I've heard about your arrangement." A slow, oiled smile. "Must be an unusual job description, playing lullabies for a man with one eye. I hope he compensates you generously for the limitation." 2 seconds of silence. Sabine stepped forward. "Mr. Burr." Her voice came out with a clarity she hadn't planned, carrying easily in the room. "In my experience, men who fixate on other people's limitations are almost always using the exercise to avoid examining their own." She held his gaze without effort. "Leith Carano built an operation that runs on precision and loyalty. By my understanding, you've spent 3 years losing both. I'd redirect your energy toward your own portfolio before your remaining partners do it for you." The silence that followed had texture. Fulton Hess, standing 2 feet behind them, made a sound like he'd inhaled something wrong. Octave Burr's face had gone the color of bad weather, and when Sabine glanced at Leith, she saw it clearly for the first time. A spark in that single hazel eye, quick and genuine, dark-edged and warm. "You'll have to excuse Miss Wray," Leith said pleasantly to Burr. "She hears everything and forgives very little. I find both qualities extraordinarily useful." Burr turned and walked away. Fulton materialized at Leith's shoulder immediately. That was Octave Burr. "You cannot allow her to speak to him like—" "She was accurate," Leith said, and the sentence closed the conversation. "Something I expect from the people around me, Fulton. Consistently." Fulton was quiet in a way that had shape to it, Sabine heard it. The lights went out at 11:43. The ballroom dropped into total darkness, and the first shot came 11 seconds later, close enough that she felt the displaced air, and Sabine understood in a cold, crystalline instant that this was not an electrical failure. Around her the room erupted, screaming, the percussion of running feet on marble, the high register of shattering glass, and under all of it the flat, rhythmic crack of automatic gunfire. Leith's arm came around her waist in the dark and brought them both down low before she processed the decision to move. He kept her against him as they navigated, moving fast, efficient, without hesitation, through the churning crowd. She realized distantly that he was orienting entirely by sound, which put him at no disadvantage at all. Oscar materialized from the dark. South corridor, 40 seconds. They made it in 30. The maintenance room was small and stark, shelves of cleaning supplies on both walls, a single emergency light throwing everything in flat yellow. Sabine shoved a chair under the door handle. Leith checked his magazine in one practiced motion and looked at her. Really looked, the way he did when something was getting his full attention. "Are you injured?" "No, are you?" "No. Your peripheral on the right is. Miss Wray." She stopped. "I have been aware of my visual field for 18 months, he said. Not angry, not brittle, just absolutely clear. I have adapted. I do not need you between me and the door." He held her gaze. "I need you to be still and trust me and let me do what I do." Outside, boots, 2 sets moving methodically, checking each door. She pressed back against the shelf and gripped the metal bracket behind her and did not move. The handle turned. A boot connected with the doorframe and the wood split, and 2 men came through with their weapons up, and Leith moved. 1 fluid step left, accounting for his angle without thinking about it, just compensating the way he always compensated, the way he had made into second nature, and the shots came so close together, they registered as a single sound. Both men went down. Silence returned. Sabine stood very still. Her ears rang. Her heart was at a frequency she didn't have a name for. She looked at the doorway and then at Leith and found him already holstering the weapon, his breathing entirely even, his face calm. "You were going to stand in front of me," he said. "Yes." He crossed the room. His free hand came to her jaw. Not rough, not tentative, just deliberate in the way that everything he did was deliberate, and tilted her face up. This close she could see all of it. The full cartography of the scarring along his right cheekbone, the way the emergency light caught the old damage, the texture of something survived. She realized she had not been afraid of it in weeks. She wasn't sure precisely when that had happened. "I may only see the world with one eye, Miss Wray." His voice was low, unhurried, each word placed with precision. "But I have never, not once, missed a thing." She believed him without reservation. Oscar got them out through the loading dock. In the armored car moving north through the city, Leith was already dismantling the evening on the phone, dispatching teams, authorizing countermeasures, his voice low and absolute and entirely without panic. His hand rested on the seat beside hers. Not touching but present, radiating warmth she was no longer pretending not to notice. Fulton requested the seating arrangement from the auction coordinator 3 days ago, Oscar said from the front seat. He was the only person outside this vehicle with the full security layout. Leith said, "I know." Sabine said, "I heard it." Both men looked at her. 3 weeks ago, Port Everglades, when he told you he'd relay your instructions. He paused before the word relay, a fraction of a second, but it was there, and his pitch dropped underneath the professional register on the words after it. She kept her voice steady. "People do that when they're wrapping a lie inside the frame of a true sentence. It's a microtell. The rhythm breaks because the brain is managing 2 tracks at once." She looked at Leith. "I didn't know what he was lying about then. I know now." Leith watched her for a long moment. She had seen that expression before, the focused, calibrating attention he gave to things he was reassessing upward in value. "You heard that," he said. not a question. I told you I hear everything. The silence in the car lasted almost a full minute, then, Oscar, find me Fulton Hess. They traced him to a warehouse in Opaloka through a shell company that took 6 hours to unwind. He had 35 armed men staged inside and a running vehicle outside, and the composed certainty of a man who believed he had finally closed a chapter. Sabine waited in the second vehicle. Oscar told her afterward how it went. The warehouse doors opened and Leith walked through alone. No visible security, no army. Just a single figure moving at his own pace across the concrete floor, hands at his sides, the eye patch and the scarring and the bespoke jacket and the total absence of urgency. Fulton had been expecting a siege. He had prepared for a siege. He had not prepared for this. "Just you," Fulton said. "You actually came alone?" "My people are otherwise occupied dismantling everything Octave Burr has built on the East Coast," Leith said. "I didn't need them here." He stopped 15 feet from Fulton. "You arranged the acid attack 19 months ago. You gave Burr the security layout on Saturday night. And for 3 years before either of those things, you were skimming from every operation you managed while I trusted you completely." He said it without heat or theater, simply as inventory. "I wanted you to know that I knew before." Fulton raised his gun. "Go ahead," Leith said. The trigger pulled, click. He pulled it again, click. Around him, 35 men lowered their weapons, not at Leith, away from Fulton. Along the warehouse walls, Oscar and a dozen faces Fulton recognized stepped forward from the shadows. Men he had believed were his, who had never been anything but Carano's. "You spent 19 months focused on what I lost," Leith said into the silence. His voice carried across the whole space, unhurried, every word arriving with complete precision. "You never once stopped to consider what I kept." He looked at Fulton steadily. "The men who were in the room when my face was burning chose to stay. That is not a thing you can buy or reassign or inherit by waiting long enough." He paused. "That is the only thing that has ever actually mattered." He said something to Oscar then, quiet final, and walked back toward the door. Sabine was standing outside in the night air, arms crossed against the October cold coming off the bay, when he emerged through the warehouse doors, upright, unhurried, the way he always moved. She closed the distance between them without deciding to. His arms came around her before she finished the last step, pulling her fully against his chest, and she stopped maintaining any of the professional distance she had been so carefully preserving for months. She pressed her face into his jacket. She felt the solid warmth of him, the steadiness of his breathing, the way he held her like she was something he had specifically decided to keep. "It's done," he said into her hair. She pulled back enough to look up at him. In the warehouse light, all shadow and hard angles, and the geography of everything he had survived, he looked less like something to be frightened of than anything she had encountered in her 27 years. "The year isn't up," she said. "No." Denny's debt was the terms. "Yes. I want to renegotiate." Something moved in his eye, the same sharp warmth she had first seen when she'd sent Octave Burr walking away in the ballroom. "Tell me what you want." Sabine held his gaze. The bay moved behind him, and the city hummed at its low constant frequency, and she heard all of it the way she always heard everything. Completely, in full, and underneath it, close and steady, the particular sound of his breathing, which she had catalogued so thoroughly over 4 months that she knew exactly what each variation meant. Right now it meant he was waiting and hoping and not letting himself say so. "I want to stay," she said. "Not for Denny, not for the arrangement." She kept her eyes on his. "I have spent 4 months listening to every room in this building, learning the acoustics of your life, and it is the first environment I have ever been in where the silence feels like something worth staying inside. That is not the kind of thing I walk away from." Leith Carano was quiet for a moment. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, the same way it had in the storage room. Deliberate, certain a decision rather than an impulse. "You hear everything," he said. "Yes." Then you already know my answer." She did. She had heard it in his breathing before he said a word. He pulled her back in, and this time when he held her, his face came down to rest against her temple, and she felt him exhale, slow and complete, the release of something that had been held under pressure for a long time. The bay made its sound. The warehouse behind them was doing whatever it was doing. None of it touched them. In the months that followed, the story that circulated through the underworld was this: Leith Carano had walked into a warehouse alone, with one eye and an empty room at his back, and come out of it the way he came out of everything, standing and unchanged where it counted. What the underworld was not told, and would not have believed, probably, was that the woman beside him when he re-established his authority was not a prop or a transaction or a hostage who had made peace with her circumstances. She was a 27-year-old violinist from Winwood, who could hear the architecture of a lie inside a single misplaced syllable, who had stood in front of armed men with a metal shelf bracket, and not shaken, who had learned to play Bach at 7 in the morning in a glass-walled study for a man who had rebuilt his entire perceptual world from the inside out, and who had, in the process of learning how he heard things, learned how to be heard herself. They played in the evenings now when the work was done. She played violin. He had started guitar years ago and abandoned it, and she was teaching him again. Badly, often hilariously, and when he got a chord right, she had told him once the whole harmonic structure of the room shifted around it. He told her he knew. He had always known. He had simply needed someone willing to stay in the room long enough to hear it.